Today's video is brought to you by Incogni. More from them in a bit. When I was a young lad, few events compared to the excitement of the monthly arrival of my favorite magazine, Popular Science. Now, to a naive child, these wacky covers and bizarre predictions weren't fantasy. This was a prestigious magazine, a reputable source. And if this magazine said that we were getting jetpacks, well, we were getting jetpacks. Now, obviously, most of the predictions from a magazine such as this probably haven't aged too well. Whether it be the 350-mile-per-hour supercar or whatever this is supposed to be. Turns out that Popular Science was exactly what it sounded like. You weren't reading a magazine to see a new study broken down into detail. You were there for the practical applications of technologies that may or may not exist. But just for now, I want to cover one specific article from one specific issue. One I remember fairly well. June 2005's The Best of What's Next. This was the cover story. It was 5 predictions for the future, spanning from the not too distant year of 2008 all the way up to 2020. But before we get into all of that, whether you like it or not, your data is being traded and sold by large corporations, often without your knowledge. Data breaches are a constant threat today, and with that comes scams, identity theft, and even online stalking. Anybody can check your information online at a glance, and this information is frequently abused by people with bad intentions. Yeah, sure, you might have gotten the occasional robocall and maybe some sketchy emails, but it goes deeper than that. Health insurance companies can actually increase your rates based on your online activity. Did you know that? This is scary, dystopian stuff, and you are currently living in it. Everything about you can be found out by anybody who wants to know it, but there is a solution. Incogni, the sponsor of today's video. Incogni reaches out to these data brokers on your behalf, trading your information and requests that your data be removed. And they deal with any objections that these people might have. The whole process is automated, and you can just sit back and relax as your information is scrubbed from the web. So act now, take your data back, and the first 100 people to use the code KNOWLEDGEHUSK at the link below will get 60% off Incogni. Take a robot arm, put a seat on it, let the rider control the arm, and that sounds like a pretty fun ride. Now take that ride and weld it onto a traditional roller coaster track. Surround it with a bunch of fancy screens that can immerse you in whatever environment you desire. And this is the ultimate roller coaster, I guess. At least that's what the company RoboCoaster thought in the year 2005. Now already by 2005, RoboCoaster had supplied a few theme parks with robot arms, with these robot arm rides, but none of them were remotely close to the scale and size and scope of the ride proposed here. But it didn't seem all that unrealistic, not at first glance. Existing attractions already had elements of this in place. Rides with big screens, robot arms, actual roller coasters existed. Just shove them all together and you'd be golden. 3 years, not a lot of time to get the job done, but that's the future. We'll worry about it when we get there. The biggest concern the company seemed to have was actually motion sickness. And that makes sense. I mean, what happens when you combine mid-2000s CGI with low refresh displays on a roller coaster with a robot arm? The fact that the riders themselves could choose the theming and the robot arms movements, I mean, that could cause its own set of issues as well. And as you might have guessed, this RoboCoaster did not open by 2008. The closest the company actually got to this was in 2010 with Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey at Universal. But it's still not quite as advanced as the company was aiming for in its initial plans. Rather than run off an actual roller coaster track, this is more of a dark ride. To my surprise though, there are still rumors as recently as 2022 that a proper RoboCoaster, as originally shown off, could still be built. Popular Science would still be late with the prediction here, a bit off with the time frame, but better late than never. Yup, here we go. Imagine a future in which you have bionic eyes. You can see in the dark, you got radio waves, X-rays, you can see gamma rays, I don't know. And it could all happen by the year 2010. Probably, maybe, definitely not. So what's funny about this article is that the actual company that PopSci is talking to, they were doing revolutionary things. They were pioneering technology that would actually give blind people the ability to see. But this wasn't science fiction. This was something that was actually happening at the time. And the researchers were mostly interested in explaining that as the technology would get better, within a few years, somebody who had gone blind might get the ability to see faces and read text like they could before. But alongside that, maybe the technology could be used to give people additional abilities beyond just standard vision. And then the popular science just goes straight to Star Trek. It's Geordi LaForge. He's got the visor, he's got the thermal vision. Better than realize. It's here, it's coming, the future is now. And this is what popular science does. They take the ideas, they take the technology that's being worked on, and they just crank it up to 11. It can't be, no, we're curing the blind. That's not interesting enough. We gotta have superpowers. And yeah, like the researchers humor them, but it is clear that this isn't their focus of the technology, but it does make for some fun predictions. It's never implied that this will be the norm by 2010, that everybody will be cyborgs, but that notion isn't discouraged either. Now, as for the company and people in this article, Second Sight, turns out it was a big deal. It was successful, and eventually they sold quite a few of these robot bionic eye models that actually did give people their sight back. But by 2020, the company was nearing bankruptcy, and then they gave up on developing the technology, and then people's bionic eyes were no longer supported by the company, so they went blind again. That is not a fun ending to that story. No. 2015 was always a fun year for predictions because, well, it's 10 years after 2005. A whole decade, a lot of stuff can change. But mostly Back to the Future Part 2. Yeah, that future scene in Back to the Future Part 2 where everything's in the future took place in 2015, and it gave people a lot of expectations. Expectations that, quite frankly, were never met. So remember when Marty, he's in town, he's looking around, and the big old holographic Jaws comes out of the movie theater? That part right there? Yeah. Well, the prediction here is the holographic TV. But not really. Instead, this is kind of like a 3D TV, but not really a 3D TV. I mean, it's a literal 3-dimension television, like a tiny diorama. But the way it works is transparent displays, I guess. I'm not an expert on digital micro mirror devices, so I can't say I'm completely clear on all of this, pun intended. But from what I can gather, this is 100 displays lined up next to each other that can turn themselves transparent or opaque rapidly enough to give the illusion of a 3D image. I guess it's like lines on a cathode ray tube TV, but instead of scanning just up and down, it has a Z-axis. And the genius of this comes from the limitations of technology at the time. See, in 2005, people really weren't expecting the future of television to be all digital, or at least popular science wasn't, I guess. This holographic TV was designed to operate within the limitations of 2005 technology, specifically TV signals and bandwidth. I mean, think about it. With a TV show over the airwaves, you only get 2 dimensions. There's only enough information for those 2 dimensions. And this TV didn't change that. But rather than just having motion in television be an illusion based on quickly moving images in succession, the illusion of movement in time, this would allow for the illusion of movement in space as well. If you combine them, you would get a holographic TV. The issue I have with this is 100 panels. 100 LCD panels is going to be pretty expensive, but also that would become the Z resolution. Like if a 1080p TV has 1920 pixels this way and 1080 pixels this way, on this TV you would have 100 pixels this way. And I don't know how good that would look. It's a cool, weird idea for a specific time, but it was never going to happen. From what I can tell, this actual invention was planned for military usage for heads-up displays, and the TV angle is kind of played up by PopSci, talking about how in like 2015 you're gonna have pay-per-view fights and holographic TV. To be fair, holographic TVs were not seen as that bizarre of a technology back in the day. Japan had even promised that if they got the 2022 World Cup, it would have been broadcast in holographic TV, which they didn't, and the holographic TV isn't a thing. for the most part. I mean, holographic technology does kind of exist, but it's nothing like this. It's kind of a bit more advanced than this, to be honest. Not doing another hologram video. I think that aged quite poorly. Okay, this one's a bit complicated. There is a lot going on, but forget anything you know about the term smart home as it's used today. This prediction is, how do I explain it? So you go to your local Home Depot, you pick up some rolls of smart wrap, bring it home, apply it as your wallpaper to the entire interior and exterior of your house, and now your home is a computer screen. It's all a computer screen. It's a big TV, fully customizable home. Don't like what color your shingles are, your brick, press a button, blind the neighbors. Sounds like a good time. This is powered using organic This is powered using fancy cells that take the power of the sun and convert it into energy, meaning that it doesn't even put a dent in your electric bill. And then you have OLEDs, organic light emitting diodes, which were one of the most commonly discussed future emerging technologies around this time, and for good reason. They could be transparent, they could bend, and a lot of people expected that one day they would be very inexpensive to produce. Now, all of this is true, except for the inexpensive part. Go into a store, look at an OLED TV, and tell me that this would be a reasonable choice to line every wall in your home. Like, okay, this wasn't gonna be exactly 1,000 OLED TVs on the inside and outside of your house. Most of the time, this stuff would probably be just showing, I don't know, the weather, your emails. Amazingly, this company still exists and still does things. Their focus now, and I suspect back then, was more on sustainable buildings, and they kind of dropped the whole OLED TV house angle. The final prediction we have is for the distant year of 2020. In 2005, the year 2020 was just about as far away as you could possibly imagine. That doesn't make any sense. But it was, you know, that's the far future. Anything could happen. And so the prediction here is space tourism, a space hotel specifically. During the early 2000s, space tourism was kinda a thing that might take off eventually. And a lot of people genuinely believe that within just a few years, people would be taking vacations to space stations, I guess. Now, I'll give Popular Science credit. They don't ever say that this will be an affordable vacation. It is for the hyper wealthy. And to be fair, nowadays, space tourism does kind of exist, but we don't have space hotels. At least as far as I can double check. I don't think we have them though. But interestingly, the researchers that they interview don't mention or really talk about space hotels. No, yeah, the actual story is about spacesuits. So I don't know all the specifics, but I guess the big idea here is slim spacesuits. No more pressurized gas, big Michelin Men mobile balloons, but something with a bit more range of motion. Yeah, more mobility. Not only that, but hopefully something that could be maybe a bit cheaper than the obscenely priced suits that NASA had been using for the past few decades. And the way this works is kind of like shrink wrap. You got fibers, other threads used with basic mechanical tensile strength. I don't know. It forms it protects, it shields your body from the elements. Now, Popular Science seems to take this idea a bit further. They say they're gonna 3D scan your body, liquid Kevlar poured all over you, and I don't know. This can all be recycled for other space tourists on the space hotel. Other researchers' work is talked about as well, including a massive array of nano biosensors placed under the skin to detect diabetes, I guess, in space. Space diabetes? Since this is space and gravity is kinda in short supply, you're gonna need a way to get around, and the solution they came up with is gecko feet. Like, it has little hooks in it, I guess, you know, feet that work like a gecko. As for the prediction of the Sky Hotel and humans going to Mars by 2020, yeah, I don't think that happened again. We'll double check. For the most part, these space predictions fell flat, right? But I gotta give this one credit. So the creator of those fancy slimming suits, Dava Newman, eventually went on to become the deputy administrator for NASA and director of MIT fancy space stuff. And this suit is still in development. Like, it's a real thing. Look at it. It's sure it's not getting used for space missions quite yet, and maybe it never will be. But hey, the fact it exists at all, that's a nice surprise. Nice change of pace. When I was a kid, I took this article less as a series of predictions and more as a definitive timeline for the future. I figured this stuff was going to happen because, well, the article said it was going to happen. I mean, they certainly painted a picture of what I imagine the future would be like. A future that didn't really happen and probably shouldn't have ever happened, but a future nonetheless. But that artwork is great though, isn't it? Look at that. Look at that attention to detail. Again, huge thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video. The first 100 people to use the code KnowledgeHusk at the link below will get 60% off Incogni.